Hello.
Hello, my friend.
Okay, good to finally talk face to face, even virtually.
I
So
know,
good.
I'm stoked about this, dude. This has been such a long time coming.
It has.
So, how are you this evening?
Good. Baruch Hashem.
Well, I'm going to say
Um,
it's evening for me. Is it evening for you?
yeah. It's 10 o'clock.
Ah,
I'm back from Israel, so I'm back to Canada. Fun stuff.
oh boy.
Uh, I mean, it's always better in Israel. I try to go, at least once a year to visit my dad, but also to kind of get like a recharge for me.
Mm,
Um, I just it's like that's the only word I can think of is it's a
a
recharge for me to go.
recharge. Well, that makes
Yeah,
sense. I get that.
spiritually, physically, emotionally, all of that. Just Israel does that for me personally.
Definitely can understand that. I feel like I get that from like the mountains anywhere.
Oh yeah, yeah. And my dad actually lives in the mountain areas in the north. So and that's actually one of my favorite places of Israel. Have you ever visited?
I've never visited. I've never had the opportunity.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so if
Okay.
I ever do get the opportunity, I'm gonna hit you up. See if you can meet me out there. You got to show me around.
Yeah, I would love to. That would be awesome.
Absolutely. So,
So
I mean, man, you were pretty active in the live that I did the other night. Um, some
yeah, I've
pretty
been trying to. I've actually caught a couple of your lives. The one that you did. Actually, I was in the airport. You did it with. I don't know. He was I believe a Christian, not necessarily messianic.
probably
Um,
Buck Rogers 298.
it could have been.
That guy
I don't even remember exactly what you were discussing, but it was interesting.
was probably if that's the one we were probably discussing kosher law and the application of
Yeah,
Torah.
yeah. I think that's what caught my attention.
Absolutely.
Well, I've had questions about your specific ideology for a while, but I think I want to ask you before I ask the specifics because that might fall away. Um, I want to ask you just if you can to like lay it out for me so that I can understand your take as well. I've done like very cursory like skimming over the idea of Mashiach ben Yosef. So if you can, like, I want you to go ahead, like, to go over how you see Jesus, how you see it fitting into to Judaism, and your, I guess, your choice in ideology and therefore like way of life.
Right.
I don't know if that was just too much to.
It's broad question. Probably going to be a broad answer. Hopefully not. Hopefully not too simplistic or anything. But you know, at least as I understand, and admittedly, I'm not insanely well versed on the concept of Mashiach ben Yosef either. I've read a little bit, and what I've read has made sense to me. Um, but it's a subject that I'm currently still studying, even for myself.
Okay.
But obviously, I understand that obviously Yosef from Genesis, the son of Jacob, is kind of the prototype for who this Messiah would be, and one of the fundamental themes, and I think one of the overbearing main points of the story of Yosef actually is reconciliation with the father. That's kind of what was achieved at the very end with
So I'm sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to clarify. So Joseph actually has something to do, like the biblical Joseph actually has something to do with the role of Mashiach ben Yosef, because I thought it was a title that just leads us to his lineage being from the tribe of like Ephraim and Menashe, because some have even coined that he is a Mashiach ben Ephraim. from what
Right.
I've.
So I have seen that and am familiar with that. As I understand it, there is some thematic crossover in that, at least as I understand, he's supposed to be a suffering servant, and he will die in his lifetime. But
Okay.
admittedly, I could be mistaken on that. But from what I have read, that's at least as much as I'm familiar with. And in the generality of being a suffering servant, and I get that that is pretty vague, but it is something that fits, frankly, both David and Joseph. We kind of just get we get the opposite ends of both of their story. So for the very beginning of David's story, he kind of is a suffering servant in a way. He's the least of all of his brothers, but we don't focus on that part of his story. Most of the story that we see is his days as a conquering king. Whereas for Joseph, we see more of the suffering servant side of his story. Whereas in the end of the story, he is in a sense a conquering king. But
Yeah.
again, that's a very brief, very tail end of his story. So there's some thematic crossover even between Joseph and David. But in terms of the thematic crossover, I see, with at least what I understand Mashiach ben Yosef to be, and the person of Joseph, because Mashiach ben David is not just said to be of the seed of David, but there's thematic crossover even with him. He's supposed to unite the Jewish people and reconquer the whole of the land of Israel, what it's all supposed to be, you know. And so there's thematic crossover between the person of David as king and King Messiah. Um,
I don't know if it's just my personal education or lack thereof, that I never really, when speaking of Mashiach in Judaism, we never really talked about the the thematic relation between Mashiach and King David. Only that they were both to be kings, and that's why it's Mashiach ben David, because it comes from the line of David, and that the Davidic line is the line of kingship, right?
right.
Of
Yeah.
royalty. But otherwise, I never really saw any rabbi going through the stories and saying, or going through the story of King David, and then the what's it called, the things that the Mashiach is supposed to accomplish, and say like, well, this has some correlation. So that's interesting. That's a first for me.
Yeah. And even that. So, granted, again, this is something that I've not done a voluminous amount of research on. So I'm kind of going off of what I know in a generality of
Okay.
what the mission of Mashiach is. You know, being the notion of being a conquering king, as David was. I see again, just even within the title of being the conquering king, I see a level of thematic crossover. But
Okay.
so if
Sorry,
we
I just want to thank. I keep interrupting you, and I'm sorry, and it's really difficult to do this. And also, I want to thank like my friend is sending me like a bunch of gifts, so thank you. But it's hard to maybe I should just like not see the comments if that was possible, but no, it's not possible for me.
no, it's
Okay.
totally all right, man.
It's difficult to like, I'm trying to concentrate on what you're saying, and also I want to acknowledge the people, because like when I'm on someone's live and I try to interact in comments, and I'm like, oh, he's not answering my question, it's like annoying. Okay, sorry, continue. I'm very
Right.
sorry about that.
So at least if we do take that there could be some correlation between the mission of these messiahs,
Hmm.
and the progenitors from which they're named after, um,
Right.
then the fundamental themes of their stories would be inherently important, as to the the role that they take on, and the I guess the path of history in terms of what they achieve, or even what their real goal is at the end. And that's where I see a level of reconciliation with the father and the story of Joseph being a paramount thing, because that's really what he accomplishes for his brothers. It's not it is personal, but the moment at which he saw that there was a change in Judah is predominantly when Judah's concern was for who? Well, for his father,
For
right? It
right,
it,
and for Benjamin.
well, yeah, and Benjamin, of course. But the concern even for Benjamin was that his father's head would not go down to the grave in such sorrow over losing another son. So, not necessarily even regret
Yeah,
for Joseph and what they did for him, but just remorse over how it sullied the relationship with their father. Um, and
and you think that what that was enough for Joseph to forgive his brothers? That it was about his that they had remorse for their father and not necessarily for selling him?
so I don't. I wouldn't write it out, and I'm definitely not ruling it out. Um, but I certainly don't know to the full extent whatever the midrash would say on that matter. I'm going strictly
Mm-hmm.
based on what I know from the text at this point. And yeah, that's one of the themes. And Rabbi Foreman actually has a pretty good video kind of outlining that. So I definitely wouldn't try and limit the story. I understand that Torah is multifaceted in many ways. Um, but it's just this is one face of it that I can see in the story,
Right.
I guess is what I'm saying. And
You bring up Rabbi Foreman. Rabbi Foreman does, I think, one of the most amazing jobs with Torah and correlations of stories
oh
um,
yes,
that I've ever seen. His lectures are, oh my gosh, I can't stop listening. Like it's
right,
really he's incredible.
right. I'm
The
going back
the
over actually the Tale of Two Names, because that one is that's a lot to wrap your head around. Even just going through, two. I think this will be the third time I've gone through it because it's
the
dense.
Tale of Two Names is talking about.
The difference between why Elohim is the one who creates in Genesis 1, but Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, Elohim is the one creating in Genesis 2.
Oh,
And
he
kind
has
of
a whole thing on that.
a whole thing. Yeah, it's called The
Oh,
Tale of Two
amazing.
Names. And he kind of outlines what he calls World 1 in Genesis 1 and then World 2 in Genesis 2 and kind of the differences
Right.
between the two and how that all takes effect. And yeah, man, it's
Do
spectacular.
you need an Aleph Beta account? Like, do you need to pay for
Yes.
this lecture series? This
Yeah.
one? Okay.
Yeah, that's one of the premium
Yeah.
ones. Do you have one?
I don't. I do
Okay.
not. I
Well,
have an account, but I don't pay for it.
we'll
So
we'll,
it's not a
we'll talk. we'll talk on
because
that.
because I've been looking for to be able to properly convey the idea of Elohim and Yud Ke Vav Ke within the Torah that has been so widely discussed amongst biblical scholars and TikTok, secular biblical scholars and the
Right.
like.
He
Yeah.
one thing that he actually spends a fair amount of time on is the naturally the "Let us make man in our image" statement in Genesis 1, and what he brings out in that is fascinating. So he explains a couple of the theories that we're already aware of. One of them you've posted on before, and then I'm pretty sure that I duetted that because that's one of my favorite takes on that
I
statement.
got it from him. I got it
And
from him about Nachmanides.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
and so, but what he actually goes further into that is to kind of break down the chiastic structure of the statement, right? And so it you've got the plural pronoun referring to himself, but then the singular form of creation, and then the plurality of both male and female, right? And so there
Mm-hmm.
seems to be a difference. What he really draws out is there seems to be a difference, at least in the gendered attribute between Elohim and Yud Keh Vav Keh Elohim, right? One seems to take on a more masculine approach to creation, and the other one a much more feminine in terms of of the way that he explains it.
That's
And so
interesting.
the let us in question, and then the creation of man, and very specifically male and female. So there are two things that are created there in the singular creation of man, right? And so the let us in question would be him referring to, well, the both of the gendered attributes that are involved in that creation. Right.
Wow.
Yeah, like it's
That's something that I haven't heard, and that actually might be, you know, going very close to the touchy subject of multiplicity, right? Because in the wrong hands, that idea,
right.
um,
Right.
and and it's really funny. It brings up another point. Kabbalistically speaking, there is, for lack of a better word, and for to be able to for humans to understand it, there is a cosmic sex going on in the higher dimensions, in the upper realms, where there is a feminine and a masculine kind of playing it out
Right.
and converging and right. So there is that aspect in Judaism. It's not really a mainstream thing, but um, I think I heard some biblical scholars talk about how Judaism kind of takes a turn from all the other ancient um, cultures that have gods and deities, having sexual relations in order to form things. I'm not. I really heard like one or two TikToks about it. I haven't got into it at all. But my first thing was, well, Judaism has that also in a certain sense. So maybe it's not actually you might be misunderstanding, and
Right.
even Judaism doesn't really have it because it's not actually gods having sex. We don't. I can't. I myself don't understand it
Right.
when right because it is oneness, but just really interesting.
I have found that to be the case actually with the pagan and secular, well, I can't say secular, but the religions of the rest of the world. Actually, there's a lot of crossover, but it's not really crossover because it's almost like the concept was uh, either altered or it just takes on a different form. So obviously in the Far East they have the idea of chi or ki in Japanese, and
Hmm.
it's eerily similar to the idea of the nefesh, which resides in the blood, right? Even if so when I was taking shitaru as a kid, my shihan, my karate instructor, actually broke down and explained to me the idea of ki, because that's what they call it in Japanese, like as best as he could. And so then when
So
I
you
started,
you studied Reiki?
not Reiki, no, it's called Shito-Ryu. It's karate. It's
Oh, okay, but it is connected to Reiki because you're talking about ki, and Reiki is the mastering or the of I guess the mastering and healing through ki. I guess I
right,
think
yeah.
I'm
So
from not.
that does exist in certain schools of thought in karate, yes.
Mhm.
And so as my shihan is explaining this to me, I'm taking notes, but at this point I was kind of a dyed in the wool Christian, so I'm not taking notes quite so thoroughly. But then
Okay.
when I read through Tanya, and I'm reading kind of about the function of the nefesh and how it resides in the blood and whatnot, and that pretty much follows along the exact same track as the way he was describing ki. And I'm like, oh, okay. So there's a level of crossover. It's almost like a fundamental concept got misunderstood and almost emphasized a little more, and so hence
Hmm.
Key was born. Um, and there's a number of other things like that. So even I would say the understanding of the 10 Sephirot in a way would correlate to the 9 worlds of Yggdrasil, the Viking world tree. There's a level of correlation there that I
Yes.
think is just evidence of fundamental truths that all humanity was aware of at one point. And obviously, my belief would be that Judaism has preserved those truths.
Yeah, it's really a touchy subject on here. That the idea because you'll hear different people say, we actually own this and you took this from us, and no, we actually, you actually took this from us. And there is, I think, a place for the talks of cultural appropriation and colonization leading to the I guess not merging, but like taking over of other religions into, right. But on another hand, I think it's really important to just see the connections, just be able to see that there are connections within our different lines of thinking. That there might just be different translations of the same idea,
Right.
and you just need to be able to pick up on that to see it. And once you see it, it just brings you closer to that other person, instead of just saying, you took this from us. Or okay, because I can't really prove. Yes, there is an idea in Judaism that Abraham had children besides Ishmael and Isaac, and he sent those kids to the east with gifts. And the commentaries say that those gifts were the secrets of the like Kabbalistic secrets and the like, and those ideas were spread in the East by these children, developing the Eastern religions.
Right.
Right. So there's no way to prove that.
Right.
Okay. There's interesting correlations, and I think it's just interesting. It's good to just see the connections, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I guess not to digress from your original question too much. That was a fascinating rabbit
I think
trail.
we're on a tangent of a tangent of a tangent of a
Right.
tangent.
We went way off the rails on that one, but
Yeah.
my understanding, particularly for the Jewish people, and I've said this in videos before, is that they have already been set apart. This is what Bilam says to Balak, when he's asked to curse them, is that Hashem has already set them apart. They're not numbered among the nations. They've already been to Sinai. They're already in a covenant with Hashem. Where I would say the role of Jesus and its thematic similarities with that of Joseph is that the benefit of Joseph being given over to the nations, as it were, which even in Jewish literature, Egypt is usually, well, not usually, but at times used as a euphemism for the nations in general. But the reason for Joseph being given over to Egypt was for the benefit of Egypt, rather than his brothers. And I think this comes from Rashi's commentary, if I'm not mistaken, where it says that Jacob asks his sons, "Why are you being so conspicuous?" And it's kind of the idea being that they weren't really hurting from the famine as much as everyone else, and why should they? Right? They already live under God's promise. So there's no reason they should have been suffering from the famine the way the rest of the world was. And so the reason that Jacob sent them to Egypt in the first place was to maintain appearances, I guess, for fear of being robbed of what they did have.
This is Rashi's commentary, you're saying?
Yeah, actually, I believe it is Rashi's commentary. I'll have to actually tell you what.
Wow.
Do you remember?
That's really interesting.
If you
It's
remember,
the first time I've heard this.
and I may be misquoting.
It's only because it goes. It might not. It might be Rashi. I don't know. The thing is that it's not necessarily the narrative, like the mainstream Orthodox narrative, I guess.
Right.
Because we do take the fact that like there was a famine and they needed it, like that's why they went. The same with Abraham, he had a famine, and they actually make a point to say like, how I think that, I don't know what the point is, I don't remember the point exactly, but they talk about the fact that they were promised the land, and yet as soon as they were promised the land, what's the next thing? Oh, they have to leave because there's a famine, or something happens, or someone takes their well, or something like that, right?
Right.
So it's very interesting, Jacob.
Yeah, I will have to hang on. Is that off the
I
top
just
of
have
my
my
head? Do not remember the chapter that it's in.
right. I mean, I don't know. I'm just looking at the parsha of the Joseph story, right?
Right.
Um, but where is
Is
it
it
that
41?
he?
Maybe Genesis 41.
No, it is 41. You're right. It's
Okay.
Mika. It's Mikates, or maybe it might be 40. I don't remember. No, no, it's not. You're right. It's 41 because he's already out of the pit.
Okay. Joseph and Pharaoh.
Here,
Yeah.
42. It's the
Okay.
beginning of 42.
So it's 42.
Yeah.
Okay.
Aleichem Shalom Samuel Fox. Um, it was the second year of the famine, and although Jacob's family, this is according to a book called the Seder Olam, and
Uh-huh.
although Jacob's family still had provisions, oh, like you kind of alluded to, yeah, Jacob was concerned and dispatched his sons to Egypt. Okay, so there is a point to what you're saying about them not necessarily needing it at the moment, but seeing the danger of the famine looming over. That's at least according to the Seder Olam,
Right.
which
It's
is another commentary. So it
I
goes
remember reading it in my Chumash, but I can't remember which rabbi's commentary, because in the Chumash it's kind of just all different rabbis, but Rashi is one of the bigger ones, and it just I recall it being
right.
Rashi being the one who points that out. But so be that as it may.
Okay.
So the benefit of Joseph then and his plan for Egypt was for the salvation of Egypt at that point, rather than for his brothers, and kind of where I see that in relation to the person of Jesus, being that, yes, so the Jews are already set apart, right? They already have a covenant with God. They've already received the Torah, and so kind of where I see is a level of reconciliation with of the nations with God at this point. And so now this is where I would lean a little on some of what the New Testament says, being that Paul in some of his epistles specifically outlines, that the nations were cut off from the covenants of promise, and far away from the Commonwealth of Israel, and due to the the I don't even want to say sacrifice, but I guess that's the best word to use at this point, of Jesus, that an opportunity was made for them to be brought near, you know, certainly not to replace. And I think that's where most Christians go way off the rails there. And even most Messianics at this point, is there's this idea of replacementship, and I don't see that being the case. For me,
So sorry, my first question would be, come close to what exactly? For the other nations to come close to God, or to come close to Israel, to come close to the inheritance that Israel has with God? Like, what exactly do they come close to? What do they gain with this adoption idea?
uh, I would say yes. All of the above. I mean, because
Hmm.
what would it mean to be close to God's people? Would that not also bring one closer to God Himself?
Um, I don't know. I don't see necessarily. I've personally struggled with the idea of chosenness, what that means, uh, recently, because it's um, an idea that if a person looked at the idea from the outside, they would think it's extremely, um, not racist. Racist isn't necessarily the
Right.
because we don't. It's not really seen as less. We don't see other people's as less. But
There's an
and I don't even
exclusivity
want to
element.
say this. Okay, I'm gonna say it because I can say and admit that I struggle greatly with this idea, but that the purpose of everything, the nations included, is all for the Jewish people, is all for the Jewish people to come and have a connection with God, and the nations serve a purpose, a means to an end for that, for that, which I don't. I can't. It does. It really doesn't sit well with me. I don't know how it did before, but it doesn't sit well with me now. The less spicy version of chosenness is that we accepted a mission that basically we were chosen because we chose, right?
Yes.
We
Yeah.
throughout the ages, as a nation, as a family that became a nation, and tribes, we held on to certain ideas about how the world works, and therefore how we acted in the world, and in that way we chose to be in a covenant with God, and God therefore seeing that reciprocated and developed this covenant with the Jewish people. So it's not necessarily that we are better, but that we were chosen because we chose. There's other versions of it that there. I think it's like there are levels of I guess extremism when it comes to this idea.
One of the ways that I think that I personally view that, um, and it kind of what I derive from the Torah, especially with every mention where Hashem says, you're to do this diligently, and specifically so that when the nations look at you and they see that this is a peculiar people, right? It's the idea of almost that it's a divine, it's a mission that's been accepted, but I would say a divine responsibility, to show the rest of the world uh, a part of God that they otherwise, I don't think, would have an access to. It's because who was the Torah given to? And that's what is the Torah? Is it not the very soul of God revealed in writing? And so that was given specifically to the Jewish people, so that they could demonstrate it to the rest of the world. And if you've seen my series on the oral tradition, this goes even further in that, because sure, anybody who can learn to read Hebrew then has access to the written Torah, but the oral Torah specifically being what I view to be the double portion that is promised to the firstborn son. It's something that exclusively the Jewish people have, and because
The
it's
the
exclusive.
oral Torah is the double portion of the firstborn. Is that what you're saying? Is that's the
That's yeah.
correlation?
That's kind of right. That's how kind of how I view that, because the written Torah is accessible to anyone from any of the nations who can learn to read Hebrew. Now they can only read it. Full understanding of it, I would say, I would still say, needs to come at the foot of an instructor for sure. But they can still read it if they can learn to read Hebrew, all the same. But the oral Torah is, well, it's oral, so that really can only come at the instruction of one of God's chosen people. So I see that as being part of the divine mission, I guess, of being a like my friend Moshe says, a lighthouse to the nations. You know, and this is something that is even echoed in the New Testament by Jesus, and this is something that a lot of Christians don't understand. A lot of Christians, they read the New Testament and they automatically place themselves in the position of whoever Jesus is speaking to, and they forget a lot of times that Jesus is not speaking to Gentile people; he's speaking to Jews. So at the Sermon on the Mount, when he's looking at a crowd of Jews and saying, "You are the light of the world," it, it's not. It's a little more specific than just anybody who expresses a belief in him. That's that he's being specific to the Jewish people.
So then, how did he become? Okay, I had. Okay, I'm gonna lose track of all the questions that I have because just give me 1 second. If I can remember them, it's just going to come back to me. How did he become a connection source for the nations if in his whole lifetime he was speaking to the Jewish people? And really his whole message was to the Jewish people that they have kind of gone in the wrong direction, like the other prophets were speaking, basically, right? And trying to reshape how Judaism looked there. How did that become a bridge? How did he become a bridge?
So this is one of the areas where I would lean heavily on what I know from Jewish history, um, because again, and this is what one of the important things that a lot of Christians tend to overlook when reading the Gospels is understanding that the time period of the ministry that Jesus was speaking in, excuse me, was mostly under the period where Shammai was the majority view of the Pharisaic movement at that time. At least that's what's believed, is that the time period that would have taken place would have been after Hillel had passed on, and I believe even after the point at which some of Shammai's students had even killed some of the students of Hillel, as I understand. Um,
Really?
and yeah, I'm not
Wow.
sure if that was an intentional murder or if it just happened by accident, or if they sentenced them to death as like heretics or something like that. But that's a story that I'm loosely familiar with.
I
Um,
need to find that story.
so part of it actually goes into one of the sermons that Jesus is teaching, where he says, your fathers killed the prophets, and that doesn't make any sense if you're reading through the prophets. At what point did religious Jews ever kill prophets in the Old Testament? But as I understand, some of the students of Hillel were referred to colloquially as the prophets. And so if at some point the students of Shammai had killed some students of Hillel, then contextually this statement would make sense.
Okay,
But
so one thing that confuses me is that we know that we go with at least now today we go with Hillel for the majority
right,
of rulings. So you're saying that there was a time period where the community, at least of Hillel and Shammai, um, who were in Israel, or were they in Babylon?
this would have been in Israel at this
In
point.
Israel.
Yeah, there. So as
Okay.
I understand, there was a point in time where Hillel the Great was the Nasi of the Pharisaic sect of the Sanhedrin, right? At least that's what I've come to understand. What I understand about the history of that is that Shammai usurped that position from him, and that point, and it only lasted a 7 year period, as I understand. And within that 7 year period would have been the 3 years where we find the ministry of Jesus. Um,
That's really I'm gonna have to like if you can give me those sources later on, if you can find them, because I'm not as I was just about to go to my bookshelf um, to pull out a Talmudic reference book, because I'm not so well versed in the lives of the, but I have a book on it, except it's not here because I'm moving, um, and I just remembered that. So never mind.
but so where I would see the connection there for the Gentile world is that in the stories that we read between Shammai and Hillel, and what we know of the history of them is um, Hillel had a not necessarily maybe not a proactive desire, but was certainly not averted to showing Gentiles the ways of God, and bringing them into the fold. There seems to be a great willingness on his part to welcome Gentiles into the fold, at least in the means of converting them. Be
Okay.
as in that sense. Whereas Shammai seems to have been. I don't want to use the word racist because that might be a little irreverent, but he he seems to have been a little bit more of an extremist in terms of purity, in that aspect. And that being the case, uh, what we know of Jesus' teachings is that he most certainly aligned much more with the
With
teachings
Hillel.
of Hillel, to the point of even self-identifying with Hillel's take on the two great commandments. Obviously, all Jews understood that loving God comes first, but loving one's neighbor was Hillel's interpretation of what came second. And when asked the question, this is exactly what Jesus said. So that seems to be a pretty blatant self-identification with that philosophy. So it would seem that in his lifetime, he not only preserved the teachings of Hillel in Israel proper, but it was shouting them from the rooftops, to use a colloquialism, in a way that I don't know of many others in Jewish history that we could read from the time period who were teaching at least that staunchly in the face of what Shammai would have been teaching at the time, or what the students of Shammai would have been teaching at the time. And
Other
so
than
I think
Hillel.
that preservation of at least that heart towards the Gentile people and the willingness to invite them into the fold, I think that is what provides that connection.
Okay. So I guess going along these lines, or another question that I have, and I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm um, putting you on the spot, or if I'm like just asking too many,
No, go
but
ahead.
um, you seem to be your thoughts and your views on Torah and seem to be very much in line with rabbinic Judaism, right? And you take a lot of like from rabbinic sources, and so the thing that I don't understand, and I think this is more might be more of a personal question for you, and I think you touched on this 2 nights ago. You touched on this with I don't remember his name. I'm sorry, Connor something. I don't
Chris,
remember.
random Chris.
Random Chris. Okay, yeah. That why isn't conversion an option for you? And I'm not saying like, oh, come convert. I'm not like the, but but and then the attached question is, why is Jesus so important to the story? Meaning, uh, meaning he can I can see I can even see a Jew acknowledging Jesus as a person who really meant the best for his community, and was a healer who was very connected to I would even say Kabbalah in a certain sense, because of what we see in his healing, and an exorcist, um, you know, and a sage because he taught, right, and an orator. But why does he need to be anything more than that? Because that would just put him in line with the other the other rabbis, and obviously there's still a little bit of an issue there, but it's a lot less of an issue than seeing than putting him, I mean, with Judaism, at
Right, right.
least. Yeah, there's a lot more of a problem with just putting him in the primacy of your faith, right? That you need Jesus to for, but then align yourself with everything else within rabbinic Judaism. Like, the one reason why I duetted or stitched Seamus that first time was because he used Maimonides to, I don't remember what it was, to talk about a Christian idea, or talk about an idea that was connected to Jesus, and it 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 doesn't seem genuine because it seems disingenuous. Sorry, that was because the Rambam rails against Christianity and how it's idolatry and how it's, so it doesn't seem to click, to mesh, right?
Right.
So I did ask, I think, two separate questions that are related, like why not conversion and why does Jesus need to be a part of it if everything else goes along with Judaism, with your view, right?
Right. Um, so why not conversion? There's a few answers to this one actually. So I recently was made aware of a community in Dallas actually that, and I've not done a whole lot of research in it. And one of the dangerous things about this, uh, I don't like to include myself with the Torah practicing uh, Christian community for reasons that you and I have discussed. Is that I like you said, I do tend towards Orthodoxy, much too much for most of their liking. But so all that to say, within this movement, there are Christians who are of a Jewish ethnic birth, and they understand the word Orthodox carries weight. And so, even if they come from like a Reform background or a conservative background, and they converted to Christianity at some point, they will tell other people that they grew up in Orthodoxy, because they know it makes them sound official to Christians, and they know the Christians don't know enough about Orthodoxy to tell the difference. Um, and I've encountered that a couple of times. And so what I'm about to tell you, take with a grain of salt because I've not looked enough into it to really, really tell whether or not. But there is apparently a community in Dallas that is run by Orthodox rabbis. They on their website says they hold to the 13 principles. They study Talmud, Midrash, Mishnah, what have you, but that they also offer halakhic conversions without the stipulation that one deny the messiahship of Yeshua. Um, but the way I see that is like, well, what's that really worth if the rest of the Orthodox community still doesn't recognize that? Like it seems moot. But so that does exist, and that leads into, I guess, my main answer to the question, is that my understanding is that even though I am not a Trinitarian, right? So I don't worship Jesus. I don't believe that he is God. And I've heard Rav Dror. I'm not sure. Are you familiar with who he is? So
Yes.
I saw a video where he explains actually that, um, at least as far as his understanding is, that Christians who do not subscribe to the Trinity are, at the very least, not guilty of idolatry because they're not worshiping. He says they're just incorrect on who the Messiah is, and what he says
Right.
is, well, for any other Jew, you wouldn't strip them of their Judaism simply because they
Right.
were incorrect about who the Messiah was.
I think of Chabad. I have a lot of friends that I have very uh, passionate debates with around the Rebbe as Mashiach, and
Right.
I actually a lot of times liken it to Christianity, and they hate it. They
That's
they
so mean, bro.
absolutely hate it. I've done it to one person who I knew would not be like really, really offended, and even then I apologized afterward. But it's there's a lot of similarity, but also that's a great point from Rav Dror. I still am talking to this Jew as a Jew. I still see him as a Jew in every other respect. In every respect, it's just that this view, he's not aligning himself with the mainstream of Judaism, that we don't know who Mashiach is and that he hasn't come yet. And that's not such a big deal on its own if everything else is there, and especially if you believe in the 13 principles, like then that's according to Orthodox Judaism, right? Because that has become the creed of Judaism, at least in Orthodoxy. So yeah, that's why it's so interesting, and that's why I guess it even strengthens the question. Like, what does it really matter? Why is Jesus so important?
Well, and I guess in light of that, if we take that my belief is that the only reason I have opportunity to draw near to the covenant that God has with Israel is because of him, then I think that does necessitate at least a level of honor, and in believing that he did fulfill the office of Mashiach ben Yosef. It's I don't I guess I don't see where a problem with at least recognizing that would be. But again, that's just me from the outside. And I have friends who are Chabad and Hasidic Jews, and we talk about the Rebbe all the time. And as I understand, their belief is that every age has a Messiah, as it were. And so the idea is that he was the Messiah of the generation, and that at least in just like any other king, until the new king is named, the previous king is still the king, and so this is why it's still acknowledged to this day.
So that's I would say that is the less spicy version, again,
I
of the
only know what I've
idea.
been told.
Yeah, that is so, because that is also prevalent in Judaism. The idea that every age has a Mashiach, because in every age there is an opportunity for the Jewish people, and Mashiach is waiting to come. It's just that we need to get there, to be on that level, to bring him, right? He's always there. No, it's not exactly like Buddha. Somebody in the comments was asking him. It's not really like Buddha. It's not an enlightened person. A Buddha would be more, the idea of a tzaddik, of a righteous person, at least in Hasidic circles, would be more connected to the idea of a Buddha, an enlightened person. But what was I saying?
The concept of a generational Messiah being common in Judaism.
Right, so that's common in Judaism. That is not at all something that is controversial, and so any Jew could technically say, like, okay, maybe the Rebbe was Mashiach. He was one of the. I would admit that he could have been the Mashiach. The movement that he created. I get chills thinking about what he has done for the Jewish people and the world at large. One of the greatest rabbis, uh, but that's not exactly. But the more spicy version is that he is the Mashiach. That when Mashiach comes, it will be the Rebbe, and they even have an idea about the resurrection of the dead, that he's going to come from. It's
I see.
a bit mixed up, and I have the same question to them that I have to you. And at the same time, I also wanted to mention that I highly respect the position that you've put yourself in, because it's not an easy one. It is one that is being rejected by pretty much every party. there's
Right.
there's no it's there's no place that I see that you can find yourself in, and it's really difficult, as a human being that needs, belonging, right? Needs to fit in, and so many of us end up blindly following a certain way, or being comfortable with certain ideas just because of convenience, just because this is my community, and blah blah blah. And yet you're here, putting yourself completely outside of everything, just because this is something that you believe in, and I highly respect that. So I want to make that clear before I continue with this
Absolutely, absolutely. No,
questioning.
I again, I would say that the importance the importance of the figure, I think is already borne out just in the importance of the figure of who the Messiah Ben Yosef would be anyway. So it's not necessarily Jesus as an individual that's important so much as the office of Messiah, son of Joseph. My belief is just that he fulfilled that office um,
Hmm.
as an individual, and I admittedly I could even see where that argument could be made even for the Reb. It's not something that I would ever try and argue with a Jew, um, and so yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest reason why not conversion is just because I know that for me, it wouldn't be allowed and it would require me to redact certain beliefs that I have. You know,
Because even the idea is just a even the idea that Jesus was Mashiach ben Yosef, it doesn't really have such a um, what's the word I'm looking for?
heretical or
It's not really heretical. It's a fringe idea that is not really necessarily aligned with for sure mainstream Jewish thought. And if I were personally to go into it, maybe I could make the argument that it's not even necessarily from the rabbinic side, an argument that you can make. But okay, big deal. Like what ideas do you see you holding as heretical and not in line with Torah Judaism or Orthodox Judaism?
I I personally don't see any others other than that. So admittedly, the assumption that that would be um, a big subject holding me back is exactly that. It's an assumption just based on that I know that just the subject of the person of Jesus in general is a touchy one for Jews
For sure.
because of Christianity in history.
Yes.
But and that's why I take such great pains whenever approaching any Jew to explain my position on that before engaging in any real discussion, because my belief is that Christianity as a religion went way off the rails from what Jesus intended and what the New Testament even explains, you know,
Right.
and that's even in the letters of Paul. Uh, even in Galatians. So Galatians is one of the biggest ones that people like me will hear from Christians about why the Torah is invalid for believers in Jesus today. And there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the context of what's being spoken about. So it's like Paul in Galatians isn't really even addressing Jewish people at all. Uh, the context that it's written in is that he's addressing um, Gentiles who had converted to Judaism. So you could say he's addressing Jewish people in that aspect, but certainly not born Jewish people. He's addressing Gentile converts and then Gentiles who believed and were devout and I guess you would call them Noachides that had not yet converted and were being pressured to do so. And some people were doing so on the basis that they were learning that is the only way that closeness to God and salvation can come. And
Yeah.
and Paul's not even really preaching against it in a harsh manner. He's preaching against the motive. If the idea is that you're making this conversion, you're changing the status of your birth basically, um, for the sake of salvation, then your faith is not really in the fact that God loves you, and your obedience is not being done out of a heart of love for God. You're doing it because you think that a birth status is what's going to ultimately make you right with God, and that's why he's preaching against it. At least in that aspect, preaching against it. Even even he circumcised one of his disciples. He did have a Jewish mother, so it was only appropriate. Um, but I think the fundamental difference being the conversion ritual itself. What we see in the New Testament essentially seems to be a simpler path of conversion than I guess what existed in the day and what exists today. Um, and that seems to be really the heart of the New Testament. It was never intended to be anything other than Judaism. I guess the idea, though, was to expand Judaism in a way that would make it, I guess, simpler for the Gentile people to come into the fold and become part of the family.
Mm-hmm.
And I can certainly, again, I can certainly understand any of the disagreements with that. Certainly sympathize
Yeah.
with that.
So I have a problem only because it's not really in my lexicon, the idea of salvation. I don't connect to it. I don't understand what that means. I don't see myself as being saved because I'm Jewish, so I don't see other people not being saved because if they're not Jewish, or if they
Right.
don't practice, so I don't understand that. I also, there, you know, from some Orthodox perspectives, I don't know if I would say that this is the mainstream, but there is an Orthodox perspective that every human being, while every human being can have a connection to God, Jews can have a closer connection to
Right.
God.
Right.
So that is the only place where I see, and it's not it's not the overall viewpoint of Judaism. I'm pretty sure. Um, the prevalent idea in Judaism is that the non-Jews can have can have a connection with God, can have reward and eternal life in the afterlife, in the next world, and whatever that means, whatever in whatever way, right? Um, all they need to do is follow the seven Noahide laws. They don't need to become part of the covenant with of Israel, because that is a covenant of Israel and God. It's a specific covenant meant for the children of Israel. Otherwise, that's basically like saying, here, this is we are in this organization, and I'm giving you this job, and you're given this job, and you're given this job, and all of you are working together in this organization, right, to make this organization great. It's just that this group has a specific job, and you have a specific job. That is more of how I see it. I don't really subscribe necessarily to the fact that I have a potential, a greater potential of connection with God than a non-Jew
Right.
does. Which is why I don't understand and the that idea of Jesus, of needing that, of needing Gentiles to come into the fold. There's no, because for me there's no need. Like, you are a human being who was made in the image of God, who was given purpose and meaning because you have existence on this earth. So you have, and you were placed in this where in this family where you were born, in this time period, to affect something, right? You have a purpose, and it is specific to your circumstances. So it ties into the Jewish idea of free will. We don't believe that you necessarily have total free will as a human being. We have a specific point of free will, because we can't choose where we're born. We don't choose our skin color. We don't choose our family, our financial level, like status,
Right.
all of those things. But we do choose on the battleground of moral choices, and in that respect, every person can achieve a connection with the divine by choosing life, as it were. So that's why I don't get the idea. There's no need for it, right? But if you want that specific job, right, of being the Jew, then come in, right? That's why I ask these questions, and that's why I don't get it, and that's why I see things the way I see it.
So, and I guess the way that I understand it, because I do understand the position of where the Noachides are only expected the seven laws that were given to Noah, but I guess for me that seems like it would present two standards of sin and righteousness. You
What do you
know,
mean?
well, if the Torah dictates what is and isn't sin, um, then there are Gentiles all over the world. Even if they comply with the seven Noahide laws, they're still committing actions that, as per the rest of the Torah, would qualify as sin for a Jew, right? But not so much for a Gentile on the status of their not being a Jew, and so it just seems like it would be a, a duality of, I guess, sets of definition of sin in that aspect.
So I don't really see it. I would liken it to the Hippocratic Oath, for example, meaning if you were to relate something personal to me and I were to tell somebody else about it without your permission,
Right.
it would be a nasty thing to do, but it would not fall under the category of something like that I would be punishable by law, right? A Hippocratic Oath, for example, or the therapist's policy and under the therapist's rules that they are not allowed to disclose any personal information besides for like self harm and what things like that. Um, that's a different story that has a lot more weight to it, and that's specific to the relationship of the therapist and the client, right? I would say that is the idea of when it comes to sins that pertain to Jews, like kosher, that is specific to Jews, it would be something that is again is not a sin if it's something that a non-Jew does, because it's not something that is the job of a non-Jew to do or not do.
I suppose yeah, I suppose I can see that point of view. It would effectively be a difference in job description, and so uh, policy company policy applies different to different stations of
That's only
employment.
if you take my viewpoint on this whole idea
Right.
of existence and
But I
and
can
uh,
understand it. That's not to say necessarily that I agree with it, but I could definitely see where that's coming from, though, and it does make sense.
Now
In
what I'm saying, I have to say, goes against the Derech Hashem, which is a book that I've recommended to you. Um, so the Ramchal, who is one of the greatest rabbis in Judaism, and the Derech Hashem is a book that no Orthodox Jew should not know about Derech Hashem, the way it's literally translated as the way of God.
Yeah,
Um, but in there, it does kind of place the Jewish people as being in a certain sense, the plan B of God. But the plan A was that everyone was supposed to have a connection with the divine, a like straight, the strong connection with the divine, and to bring the God down to earth. And people just kept messing it up, starting with Adam and Eve, and then Cain and Abel were given that job and they messed it up, and then and so on, until Abraham came, and God had almost lost hope, so to speak, as it were. He until Abraham came and decided to take that mantle of I'm going to do this. And then God said, okay, fine. So I'll give that job to him and to his people to basically put my plan into place.
right.
Um,
I would say that's more so. I guess that would much more correlate to the view that I have on it. Is, as I understand the garden, it's where it was God's perfect ideal. Gan Eden was everything was as God created it and wanted it. Um, and so that was the place where mankind had a connection with God, which was intended uh, by God,
right.
and that the result of the sin of Adam was that we've been barred from that. But that then was reconnected in a sense with the choosing of Abraham and then the instituting of Israel and the covenant with Israel, that connection was in a sense rekindled or reconnected in a way, and that Israel is the conduit or the gateway through which the nations, all of the nations, would then find their way back to having that covenant, and that
Mhm.
connection with God. And I see kind of thematic parts of this even throughout Genesis. So you've got you had the fall of Adam, but then in Genesis 6, God says, "My spirit will not struggle with man, or will not strive in man, what have you." So it seems that that connection, that point is lost. But it specifically says struggle or strive. Now there's a difference in wordage here, but Jacob was called Israel, which is one who wrestles with God, right? And so that's the point at which that connection, which was lost in Genesis 6, is now rekindled in man, right? Is that because Jacob took on that yoke to wrestle with God, and to wrestle with himself, because so it says you've wrestled with God and man, right? And so we read that the man in question, we understand that to be an angel, but I think also in a sense, and this is kind of something my dad turned me on to, is that it was a wrestling with himself, because to fight was not in his nature, as we see throughout the story of Jacob. It wasn't with his nature. So to fight in general was a form of wrestling with his own nature, and
Well, to
that
establish the patriarchs, each patriarch actually had to go through their own struggle of fighting through their against their nature, because Abraham was seen as given 10 struggles and 10 tests to
yes,
overcome, and all of those went against his nature of loving kindness, of being basically the essence of loving kindness. And Isaac, the essence of restraint, of gevura, also had to go against his with certain tests. And Jacob likewise um, had that struggle. Um,
right. And so I see in Genesis 6 mankind, in refusing to struggle with their own internal nature, and thereby also struggling with the spirit of God in them. So then that was removed, and then that connection being rekindled with Jacob. Um, and I guess my view is that that's a connection that God intended for all humanity to have, and so Israel I see as being the gateway through which He intended for the whole world to enter into that.
mhm. Yeah, it's an idea that I fight with within Judaism, because I don't I I struggle recently to see our uniqueness as a people, and well, not necessarily as a people, because I do see our that there is something that is different with Jews, as a people. Historically, we've kind of went against the laws of history. We should not exist at this point. Not even at this point. We should not have existed like 1,000 years ago. We should have stopped existing. That we should Judaism should be talked about like ancient Egypt and like ancient Mesopotamia, and yet we're still here. So there is definitely something to that, but in the idea that we have some sort of spiritual connection that is greater than other humans, than other people, I think it's not only doesn't make sense to me, it's also could be potentially dangerous for many people in the wrong minds to have that idea. Um, and it just doesn't sit well with me that it doesn't make sense that other people could not have the same opportunity to have this connection to God, and yet we're still all put through the same crap that is this material existence, and we all go through the same human things. Like I as a Jew am still going through the same human experience in obviously a different way, right? But with in generally and with many similarities to every other human being, right?
Mm.
So I don't know. It's hard. That idea is difficult for me.
I guess. Well, is it? Would you say that what's hard to reconcile is that connection is due to birth status? Is that what's
Um,
confusing?
well, birth status only translates in Judaism or in Kabbalah as like a soul root status, which is the same thing. It's like a status symbol. It's like a hierarchy. It's something
Right.
that I don't, I don't see it. I don't know why it has to be like that when there is a model of existence that has been applied to the body of the Jewish people, but I can definitely see it as applying to the body of of humanity. I've spoken about it at length, uh, not enough though, because it's still an idea that is hard to wrap around. I did like a 6-part series or something about like primordial man, Adam Kadmon.
Yep.
Are you familiar?
Yes.
Okay. um, that idea in Kabbalah is talking about the Jewish people. It's talking about the Jewish people coming together as one.
Yeah.
I see it as humanity having coming together as one, and the Jewish people having a prominent part maybe in the body, in the cosmic body of Adam, but still that humanity is a part of this. It's not just the Jewish people and humanity somehow, or the rest of the nations are just somehow there to serve or make infrastructure for I don't I can't align myself with that thinking. It doesn't because if I grew up in a completely Jewish bubble, which for a very long time I did, which is why I didn't really have a problem with these ideas before. Then again, right, like I said, I wouldn't have a problem with these ideas. Now that I've interacted with so many non-Jews um, throughout the world, it and you know looked at their struggles, and like it says in the Torah where Moses is vayar besivlotam, I see their affliction and I'm with them in their pain because they're people like me and they struggle, right? So I'm seeing less and less of my uniqueness and more of my connection with the rest of humanity. So it gets harder and harder for me to subscribe to those ideas.
I yeah, and I could definitely see that. I guess for me the notion of Adam Kadmon, and taking the approach that it is the world, right? The whole of humanity. Uh, would you think it would be safe to say that Israel and the Jewish people would then be maybe, if we're to anatomically allocate, then maybe the head at that point?
Um,
Because, and the reason I ask is
listen,
because Tanya goes over this in that from the head and therefore the brain, the rest of the body then emanates. And so I guess I don't see a problem with my thoughts on Israel being the gateway, even fitting into that analogy.
touche. Um,
But
yes, putting Israel at the head would, one, work with your line of thinking. Two, would work even kind of with the Jewish way of thinking. Um, even tying it in with Rosh Hashanah, that we want to be the head and not the tail, and
I hadn't
whatever.
even thought about that until you said it.
But it still places a superiority of some sort onto Judaism. Where I would also say that yeah, maybe there are more important parts of the body, but it's still, in order to function properly, it needs all its parts.
Sure.
And so therefore it would make I'm trying to get away from the idea that Judaism is like higher and above the rest, you know?
That I
That's
could
on my own. Yeah.
I could definitely understand that. I guess for me, it really is an issue of well, God did choose Abraham for a reason and chose to use Abraham's seed, and the reason that He gives is because He knew that He would teach His children, and so uh, I'm not averse to the idea that there are certain traits and certain talents that maybe are genetic in a sense of being passed on through family lineage. Um, and it's not to say that they're exclusive, but maybe perhaps more common. Um, and it seems to be that among the Jewish people, um, the transmission of what is important of the ways of God from the older to the younger is well, it's there because, like you said, if they are just another people like every other nation in the world, then they shouldn't be here. And it's funny. I have a friend that I used to work with. He's a secular. He's an atheist, but he is Jewish and has a lot of good Jewish pride, and I always try and encourage that in him. Um, but in discussion, I've told him before. It's like, look, man, like, don't you get that your very existence is proof of God? Like, you you exist. There's your proof. Like, there you are. We have a good back and forth. But yeah, so I guess that would be kind of my where I lean to on it is that Abraham would teach his children. This is why God chose Abraham, and that's a trait that has just been it's carried on, and there seems to be a proclivity for it within the Jewish people, a proclivity to remember voluminous amounts of literature that seem almost inhumane in so many other ways and just not common to man. And so to be able to retain that so that you can pass it on is a miracle in and of itself that seems to be unique to the Jewish people.
Yeah, you have a point. I can't evade the facts that there is something special about the Jewish people, and it's not just an idea from within Judaism. It's something that you can clearly see when you look at Jewish history, the development of the Jewish people, and the all the persecution that we've gone through, all the big great nations and dynasties that have specifically tried to destroy us, and yet we're still here and we don't see them here, and it's been acknowledged by many people, and by people like as oh my gosh, I'm forgetting his name right now. Mark Twain. He wrote a it's a whole paper, I think it's called Concerning the Jews, um,
Yes.
where he brings this idea. It's a very powerful, very powerful question that he raises of like basically like what the hell, like what is up with this nation, this crazy seemingly eternal people of this Jew. It's a crazy phenomenon, right? um so I don't know, I can't
I heard a
evade that.
heard a rabbi once give a lesson about what Mark Twain said, actually, and he presents an argument because there was at one point an argument over whether or not Israel should be allowed nation status, uh, and I think
Yes.
this is pertaining to what Mark Twain was speaking on.
Is
So
this Jacobson? Is this YY Jacobson who talked about this?
possibly, I don't remember the rabbi's name, admittedly, but he uses an analogy that another rabbi gave. So that may be Jacobson, where to summarize the story, basically,
Yeah.
if if one of the ancient, Greco emperors got off of a plane today in modern Greece, and asked what happened to his empire. Well, they wouldn't understand him because he doesn't speak the same language. They have none of the same traditions. They eat none of the
Yes,
same food,
yes.
right? And so the same thing for one of the ancient Roman Caesars, but then Moshe Rabbeinu gets off of a plane in Israel. Well, they speak the same language. They eat the same foods. The culture is the
Like,
same.
listen,
And so,
I need to put on tefillin. Do you know what tefillin is? It's like, what do you mean
yeah,
tefillin? Of
what?
course tefillin. Come.
Well, you think you're the first Jew who's heard of tefillin?
Yes, yes. I recently watched this. Actually, I watched that lecture when I was in Israel.
Yeah,
Um,
it was a
it was great.
spectacular lesson, but it clearly lays it out. It's like, well, why shouldn't they have nation status? They qualify historically more than any other of the empires. Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, that's yeah. It just what you'd said had reminded me of that lesson.
I'm just looking up concerning the Jews because it's actually worth reading at least an excerpt from it. 'Cause it's very powerful, and especially because it's from a non-Jew giving his take on how he sees. He also talks about the land of Israel in the 1800s and how it was this like fallow, desolate place, and how amazing that is that um, the Jews were able to turn it into this incredible oasis,
Right.
right? Here's a little snippet of it. So he has made a marvelous fight in this world in all the ages and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He's talking about the Jew. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, and the Persian rose filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they are gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now, or have vanished. The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? And
Spectacular.
yeah, I find it extremely moving for a Jew to hear that from a non-Jew. It's oftentimes that non-Jews remind us of our purpose.
Not to abruptly shift things, but I did want to go into a little bit. So two things, because I know we've been trying to schedule an interview with you forever. So I have a list of interview questions that I've always wanted to ask you, just for the sake of explanations for other people, because you can give a much better explanation than I. But I also did want to go into a little bit into what we were discussing in our messages earlier, kind of the misconceptions that a lot of people get from Kabbalah, from a lot of people who claim to have come out of a Kabbalistic cult.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. The Frankists.
Yeah,
that
so
you talked about.
So kind of go over, I guess, a history of like, because I know there was Shabbatai Tzvi, who came before Jacob Franks, and Jacob Franks built on his movement, and so a lot of the misconceptions that modern Christians get about Kabbalah, because they may hear the word loosely, or they may remember that Madonna said it at one point or something like that, and when you Google it, most of what you're going to find is going to be propaganda from like neo-Nazi white supremacists about how it's a Luciferian satanic practice of child sacrifice and all kinds of other dark, ridiculous stuff. And it admittedly, that was my initial understanding of what Kabbalah was too, and it wasn't until much later in my studies where I actually started to look into Jewish mysticism because there are things about the Tanakh and even the New Testament that are just undeniably mystic and not explained by any other literature than literature on Jewish mysticism. And so the more I looked into Kabbalah, the more I realized, oh, that's definitely not what I heard about. So
Yeah, well, there's a history of demonizing Kabbalah that goes as far back as the Middle Ages, with Christianity being involved, right, being the main prosecutor um, of this kind of witch hunt that started with the Jews. Um, but and if you want, I could go through the basics, really basics of what is Kabbalah, but I can also touch on the offshoots and the where what people are talking about now and what we specifically talked about, like Frankist and the Sabbatean movement. That started. It is technically a messianic movement, because Shabtai Tzvi proclaimed when he lived. I'm trying to remember. If you want the exact dates and times and stuff like that, I'm horrible with that. I go to Google and whatever. But I think he lived around the time of the Middle Ages. I'm not 100% sure on that. There, at least in the times when there was a Muslim dynasty of some sort, because he ended up converting to Islam. Um,
it was
but he
1600s.
Okay, okay, the 1600s. So he proclaimed to be the Messiah, and he had a following, and there were a group of Jews, good amount of Jews who, had their hopes set on Shabtai Tzvi being the Mashiach, and he did great damage, and ended up converting to Islam after confrontation with the leader. I
The
forget the
emperor of
name.
the Ottoman Empire at the time,
Yes.
I think.
Yeah. So later on, in I believe the 1800s, there came a man named Jacob Frank, who claimed to be the reincarnation of Shabtai Tzvi, and he gathered this following. Now, here's where he really veered off to a dark place, because and where he warped Kabbalah. There is this idea that um, holiness has been spread throughout the whole world in shards, in little sparks that need to be redeemed, need to be taken out and brought back to source. This has to do with the idea of the shattering of the vessels, which I'm not going to go into. It's a very deep Kabbalistic idea of how the world, kind of how God poured light into vessels in order to create existence, and I'm not going to go into
That's broad, yeah.
it. Yeah, it's too much. But there is this idea that for example, when I say a blessing on an apple, there is a spark of holiness in that apple that I am releasing, and I am able to elevate the spiritual component of that apple, of that physical thing that is an apple, right? Everything has a spiritual component to it. I'm able to elevate that spiritual component to its source, to its higher reality, and therefore fulfilling the potential of this physical, of a part of this physical realm. Now, he took this idea to say that even in the bad of the world, even in the evil deeds and all of that, there is these sparks of holiness that need to be taken out. So, and there's also another idea to this. A person, and this is also in Christianity as well, I believe, in a broader sense. A person, let's say a person has a connect, like maybe Jesus gives this metaphor of a king has a prince, his son, who is spoiled and wealthy and gets riches from the king, but he sends his son away to go into the forest and venture, not be connected to his father, and he goes away and loses touch, but then somehow he finds his way back, and his connection to his father and his appreciation for what his father gives him is even greater, and the connection between father and son is even greater because he left, because he went so far away. There is that idea with Judaism that a person who falls will be able to go up higher because they'll be able to appreciate, and this goes into the idea of the Baal Tshuva, the Jew who returns to Judaism, so to speak, who repents and comes back, who becomes observant. There is this idea that where a Baal Tshuva stands, a tzaddik, a righteous person, cannot stand. Meaning, in the simplest way, that a Baal Tshuva, person who comes back to Judaism after being away, after not practicing, is on a higher level than a righteous person who never sinned at all, because there was more to overcome. There was a greater struggle for this Jew who didn't observe, and on a Kabbalistic level, this Jew who didn't observe, the reason why the tzaddik, the righteous man, cannot stand where on the level of this Baal Tshuva is because the Baal Tshuva went into places in the world, into areas of where the righteous person could never reach, and the Baal Tshuva was able to elevate certain areas of the world physically and in a more ideal sense, into a higher level where the righteous person could never reach it because he never sinned, and he never went down those paths.
Let me stop you for a moment just to correct somebody in my comments. What he's explaining, the concept he's explaining, is discussed at length in Tanya, actually, and it's not saying that sinners are better than righteous. What it's saying is that, like, if you, to put it in Christian terms, that a Christian can understand, if you grew up in the Christian church, and you never experienced or experimented with the outside world of sin and unholiness, then let's say on a spiritual level in your faith walk with God, we'll equate that to a ladder. If you go up 3 rungs, but the guy on the ladder right next to you did not grow up Christian and grew up in a world full of unholiness and wickedness, then he started at the ladder much farther down than you. And so now he's on the same level with you. He has traveled a farther distance than you have, right? And so it's the idea of he who is forgiven much loves much, right? There's I don't want to say a connection, but there's an understanding of the relationship dynamic that the tzaddik, I guess, can't really grasp for lack of experience.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So this idea was taken by this Sabbatean cult, the Sabbatean movement, and basically Frank was saying that he wanted his followers to sin, to go out and purposely do evil. So because of this idea, because there's holiness everywhere. God pervades all of reality, every single aspect of it, not just the holy parts, not just the synagogues, not just the learning centers and whatever, everywhere. And that means also the bad places, that means also the dark places. So go into the dark places and do the evil, and that way you'll be able to bring back to the light. But it was never, first of all, even that mindset, even if you wanted good to come out of that, it's still not only dangerous, it's extremely foolhardy, because it's like we don't look to do evil.
Right.
It's completely, he completely warped and turned Judaism upside down with this ideology, and that is, and if any person were to see that and equate that with Judaism, obviously they would think that that's devil worship and Satan, whatever, Luciferian. Which
Right.
anyway, all of those labels, by the way, are really incorrect and it unjust to those
Yes.
actual movements, to Lucifer, to Satanism, which is in itself, if you read their fundamental ideas and their principles, their commandments, they're not that terrible. You know, they're actually pretty humane, pretty moral, pretty ethical stances on life and human behavior. You know, there are. I'm not talking about the people who have these blood dinners or whatever they're called. I don't remember, and that's a separate story. And it's, but yeah, if people were connecting this idea to Kabbalah, it's horrible. Obviously,
Right.
I would right, but that is where it stems from. It's from a person taking a Kabbalistic idea that was never meant to be put into that kind of practice. It was just meant to explain the reality of things. Like, this is what happens. Um, don't go out and commit, you know, adultery and rape because you, uh, right?
You're right. Yeah.
It's an excuse. It's an excuse to go out and be frivolous and do evil and then call yourself righteous, pious, and a Kabbalist. It's disgusting. That is where they get that idea from. That is part, but it's only part of the of the fuel for the anti-Semitism on the Christian side. That's really only one part of it.
Right. Yeah. Oh, there's yeah. Believe me, there are multiple moving parts to the anti-Semitism in Christianity, which I've pretty well dedicated, at least from my part of you know my ministry to combating that, because I have no tolerance for it. Um, and that's why I absolutely despise the Christian doctrines like dispensationalism or supersessionism, which dispensationalism in and of itself is supersessionism but with extra steps. It's
Okay.
it's the idea that God divorced and forsook Israel, and so he chose for himself from the nations his own people aside from Israel, and so the church is now spiritual Israel, and a lot of nonsense.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, it's just what I worry about with a lot of people who like this young lady that I sent you the video of. She claims to have come out of that cult, and
I didn't know they were still running. I didn't know that there were still people who were members of this group.
so a lot of like Alex Jones style global elite conspiracy theory actually centers around the understanding that they are alive and well, and actually have worked their way into the world's elite. That Mayor Rothschild and his four sons were such people, um, and yeah, basically that the global elites that are higher than the world governments themselves, and that by means of economic strong arming, they rule the world via the world's governments and use the world as a chessboard. That those people are such people. And so you get people like Mel Gibson making statements that the Jews started all the wars in the world. And it's like, okay, so in a certain frame of mind, according to his understanding of this conspiracy theory, he's not wrong because the people that he's talking about are of Jewish descent. But then to conflate that with Jewish orthodoxy as we know it, which is where it goes way off the rails.
And Judaism as a whole, yes, that's so. So I was going to say, so Jewish people historically have been on both extremes of doing great evil and great good. There is much of both. You know, for the good and the bad, there is plenty to choose from of people who have done incredibly amazing things to heal the world and to bring it into a new age, and there have been people who have done in great evil, um, but none of they were not. I would actually say that both areas are not necessarily connected with Judaism.
Right.
Meaning, when there are so many Jews who have done so much good, and yet they were not religious, observant, they did not believe in God, that some of them did not even believe in anything in Judaism. And yet they still accomplished incredibly great things. And here on this side too, the people who were evil, but they're not religious, not connected to Judaism, maybe went to a Yom Kippur service once in their life. And then there are those who are religious and still and do both. It's not it, it does not, it should not be reflective of the
The whole.
people, right?
Right.
Or the whole. Yeah.
Yeah. And that.
And this person, Jacob Frank, the same thing, a Jew, but is his movement connected to Judaism? No, I completely divorced from it as soon as he espoused these ideas.
I was just say, yeah,
That's
I would wager to say that is as divergent from Judaism as Christianity.
Yeah, as you can get, basically, even
Yeah.
more. I would say. I mean, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and so what I fear for certain people, especially those who claim to have come out of it, because within I say a lot of people who delve into conspiracy theory, especially this rabbit hole of conspiracy theory, they dive in just enough to come out as anti-Semitic, whereas if you dive in a little deeper, you come out being much more supportive of the Jewish people, and that's kind of where I've come out is that if the understanding is that these people, even if they are of Jewish heritage, have a desire to supplant the Torah, to get rid of the Torah, then getting rid of the Jewish people would also be part of their mission. And I think even what was the rabbi's name? Author of To Eliminate the Opiate. Or if you're familiar with that book. Okay.
No, I'm not.
There's a rabbi. I will send you his name when it comes to me. But he wrote a book.
To eliminate the opiate?
Yes.
The opiate?
Yes, To Eliminate the Opiate. As I understand, and it's been years and years since I've looked into this, but he had an idea that there was a global conspiracy to eliminate the Torah.
Marvin Stewart Antelman?
Yes.
History of the
Uh-oh. Uh-oh, he froze. There you are.
I was interrupted by Siri, who thought I wanted to call someone.
Right. So yeah, Entelman. As I understand, there was he had a theory that there was a global conspiracy to eliminate the Torah, which would necessitate the elimination of the Jewish people. Right? They're the protectors and the keepers of the Torah, and so because of this, and this conspiracy being headed off by again the Jews themselves being ethnically Jewish people, and so this kind of placed them at the, like I said in the message earlier, at the center of kind of concocting the Holocaust and other such movements that were bent on the elimination of the Jewish people. And as the conspiracy theories go, they did many of the same practices of committing sin for the sake of holiness and closeness to God, because that being their understanding. And so it's even pitched, the idea is pitched that the reason nobody knows who Adolf Hitler's father was because he was conceived at an orgy
At a ceremony.
A ceremonial orgy that would have been held on Yom Kippur, right? Because that would be something you're not supposed to do on Yom Kippur, and if their idea is to do what the Torah says don't do for this
Definitely
sake, right?
No orgies on Yom Kippur.
right, naturally. but but so, and that's the idea, is that there is this deep, dark, cryptic group of Jews in the upper echelon of the economic world, so wealthy and rich that you don't even know who they are, and they're by no means religious Jews, and they serve a darker cult. But that their desire is to guide the world, the Jewish people, and everyone away from to eliminate the Torah, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the constant push towards anti-Semitism is being led by them, and so you have people who claim to come out of it, but in coming out of it, they're painting the whole of Judaism as being this, and it's like, well, you're doing what they want you to do.
Right, right, exactly. I would also say that the um, if people were, if the rabbis who subscribe to this idea that there are Jews in the higher echelons who are taking people away from Torah and doing things purposefully against Torah to whatever, they would call them the Erev Rav. They would say that they are the Erev Rav. I don't know if you've heard of, I think Jewability, who is a new account, an Orthodox Jew on here, might have talked about the Erev Rav, the mixed multitudes that Moses brought with the Jews out of Egypt. This is a Kabbalistic idea. Well, it's also a Kabbalistic idea that talks
Right.
that Moses was gathering in sparks of holiness in the form of these souls, of these people, these mixed multitudes who were actually reincarnations of the generation of the flood, who needed some sort of redemption and came and needed to come back. And Moses took upon himself to rectify the world in that area by bringing these mixed multitudes with him. And like Jewability mentioned in his video, whenever it mentions in the Tanakh, whenever it says your nation, when God is speaking to Moses, he's referring to not the Jewish people but to the mixed multitudes, because it is the nation that Moses brought with him,
Right.
that he took charge of. Whereas when he says Bnei Israel, when he says the children of Israel, when you speak to the children of Israel, he's speaking to the children of Israel. And is also when it says Ha'am, the nation, it is talking about the Erev Rav. And so many times the rabbis would point to when the Jews complained in the desert, and to be the product of the Erev Rav actually complaining and getting and enticing others to complain, and that these were a people within that integrated into and assimilated into the Jewish people, but never got their rectification, and still to this day are, I guess, back to be rectified, but also have this danger of bringing others away from other Jews away from Judaism and having these things. So the rabbis would call this group the Erev Rav,
The
as well
Erev Rav.
as, yeah.
Well, I mean, I can see it. I makes sense. But yeah, it's and it is something that at least historically is somewhat traceable. I mean, we do know that Mayer Rothschild, as well, I say we know, it's understood by most scholars that he was of a Hebraic birth, and that by means of economics, he sought to control world governments. He's the one who's basically quoted with saying, "If you give me control of a nation's finances, then I care not who legislates."
Right.
And then his wife said of their four sons, essentially, if my sons didn't want war, there would be none. And effectively, two of them specifically, amassed
Wow.
the family wealth by both independently funding both sides of the Napoleonic War. One brother, as I understand, one of the sons was head over the Bank of England, and the other one France. And so the loans that they gave those governments to fund their wars amassed immense wealth for the family. So there's a little bit of historical precedence for part of this conspiracy theory,
Oh
but
no, the idea that there are five major families that effectively rule the world um, is not something that I dismiss. That I say that this is a complete conspiracy theory, because it's not. There, like you said, there's a lot of evidence for this, and the fact that the Rothschilds are a huge part of this is inescapable, and it just I for me it just sucks that they're Jews, and again it
right.
also just so happens to be that they're Jews, and it's horrible. It does a disservice to us. It is a huge Chilul Hashem. It's a huge desecration of God's name. Um, when people in power, in positions of power and influence, who are Jews, do these things. Um, but that's as far as it goes for me, right?
Yeah,
Because again, I'm a Jew, and I know that it's not connected
right.
in that way.
And that's just something that I don't know. I feel needs to be screamed from the rooftops by people who definitely know better, because there are too many ignorant people that, like I said, they'll think that they've gone deep down the rabbit hole, and they'll find themselves learning just enough to become anti-Semites. It's like, oh,
Right.
like that rabbit hole goes so much deeper than that, and when you come to the bottom of it, you come out, if anything, supporting the Jewish people more, and that's where you
Mm-hmm.
should be. Even biblically, that's where you should be. Um, but yeah, that's something I definitely feel the need to address is clear that, and then clarification on what Kabbalah is, because
Mm-hmm.
so many people are afraid of the subject. And I've been there. I remember what it was like to be afraid of the subject, because that was witchcraft and everything. And then my whole view on magic in and of itself has changed in my studies of Torah, because when Moshe's staff turns into a serpent, but then so do Pharaoh's priest staffs also turn into serpents. It's like, okay, well, you tell me how it's different. I mean, the source from which the power to do that came from, we can say that that's different. But the act in and of itself is not different. It's the same. So, whereas some people say, well, Pharaoh's priests were doing witchcraft and Moses did a miracle, it's like, well, you're arguing semantics for the same thing.
So it actually gets I thought I was going to have an easy time going just in a broad sense of what Kabbalah is, but when you bring up what is
I'm
Kabbalah,
sorry.
what is Kabbalah like, and how is it different from witchcraft, then that is something that I spent a long time trying to put together, how to give over, um, how Judaism sees what is forbidden and what is permitted within the realm of magic. It's a 3 minute video that I did, um, that it took a long time, because it is a complicated subject, because it is confusing, um, because there's so much in Kabbalah that is so magical, for
Right,
lack of a
right.
better term, right? And essentially, there is nothing different from what Moshe did to what Pharaoh did, other than, and this is really difficult to explain, because you said different sources, and it's yes and no, because ultimately there is only one source, right?
Right.
But there is attributes of that source, and there is channels of energy, and there is also the other side, the side of tuma, of impurity, that I don't necessarily understand. I would say it's commensurate to the negative energies. Negative, not necessarily always meaning bad, because if you think about it, this is a bit tangential, but I'll go back. Um, there have been stories of rabbis getting demons to help them to do good things, and there are stories of angels doing horrible things, and destruction, and all of that, and desolation, and murder, and whatever. So when we talk about Kabbalistically, negative and positive energies, we're not talking about good and bad in our sense, in our moral sense of things. But there is that side to the energetic forces that pervade and influence and interact with us. And so I would say that Pharaoh and the magicians of Egypt were connecting to the negative energies, to that source, while Moses was actually connecting to straight to source.
I was going to say, when you say the other side, are you referring to the term's escaping me? I know in English it translates to hinder side.
Sitra Achra.
Sitra Achra. Why couldn't I remember that? That's like the second time this month that I've forgotten that phrase.
It's Aramaic. It's not Hebrew. That's why it might be more difficult to.
Right. But
pull.
yeah, that's something that we could spend an entire discussion trying to explain to people. Just clarity, is that what you were referring to when you say the other? Okay, just so I know
Yes,
I'm tracking,
the
because
Sitra
that,
Achra. Yeah,
that I
yeah.
could agree
And
with
to
that.
help you remember, Achra is an Aramaic word, but there is a Hebrew correlation. Acher means other, right? Acher means other. It was the name given to Elisha ben Abuya, a rabbi in the Talmud who became a heretic and was given the name Acher, other, because he was excommunicated.
Like
So Achra.
right, acher. So yeah, Elohim acherim, other gods. That, yeah, I get that. Okay.
There you go. Exactly. Elohim Acherim. Those powers also come from the Sitra Achra when it's talking about Acherim. That's now what Kabbalah is in general. I always like to say it is the spiritual physics of creation. I know that might sound a little like oxymoronic.
Oh no, I get it. When you get
But
into the four olam and the elements
yeah,
and
the four
whatnot.
worlds, exactly. Yes. It is basically how we understand God bringing existence into being, how that works exactly on every level, how it is possible for the idea that we have of God within Kabbalah, which is ein od milvado, meaning there is nothing besides God. When we say that, we mean nothing. There is nothing but God. Even now, even right now, there is nothing but God. But for sure, before existence was put into being, there was only God. So how can there be room for anything else to exist besides God? And so it goes through that. It explains how it was possible, how God made space for there to be a creation, for there to be an existence, for there to be something that felt it had an independent reality outside of God. Us, we believe we have an independent reality outside of God. So it goes through all of that, and it also explains the nature of reality in the sense that every physical component of reality has a spiritual counterpart, a spiritual force that is enlivening it, and that ties into the concept, the broader concept that everything is being created at this moment right now. It was not that, if we look at the first word of the Torah, the first words of the Torah, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, it is mistranslated as in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. If we look at Rashi's translation, we see that Bereshit is not in the beginning, but is in the beginning of.
Right.
In the beginning of God creating the heaven and the earth. This is a continuous thing. If we were to say that it is saying in the beginning God created, and then he stopped creating on the seventh day, he rested, but the fact that it says in the beginning of is showing us a continuation of this. Right now, as we speak, there is a flow of energy from source that is being filtered down, so to speak, and channeled through many different
Tzimtzumim?
yeah, I'm trying to put it in simpler language, like different, like tubes and channels, so to speak, filters and lenses, whatever, in order to come down to us. And yeah, and it goes through that, and it also explains the idea of angels. What is angel? What do we mean when we say angels? Are they separate entities? Are they just energies that are just extension of God's will? Whatever, all of that, and when a person really understands that and knows it uh, to a very, 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 very high level, they can come to the knowledge of being able to manipulate our reality. Um, and that can be seen as magic. But it's just understanding how reality works, how God put reality into motion, what we're actually dealing with. And when you know how to when you understand the machine, you know how to work it, and you know how to do things with it that other people might not, and they might say, "Oh my God, how the hell did you do that?" I'm like, "Okay, I'm doing this. Just this is how it works. I understand it."
Yeah, the way
So,
I try and liken it to people is like a we all have a general understanding of how computers work. Most millennials today, but
mhm.
the super nerdy, well versed in computer language can get
Yes,
much deeper into the system and do things with a computer the rest of us are completely incapable of.
they are the Kabbalists of the internet.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah.
I'd never thought about it in terms like that, but that's genius. Yeah, the Kabbalists of the internet.
Yeah, so that's in a very broad sense, and just to, I think, to be on the safe side, I'm gonna go to a definition by a professor. Um, let's see what in the book that I always quote, The
I
Jewish
need to
Myth,
get
Magic, and
that book,
Mysticism
man.
by Jeffrey W. Dennis. He's not an Orthodox rabbi. He's not a rabbi, I don't believe, but he is a scholar, and so and this book I would recommend it, and I would take some things with a grain of salt, especially with the way that he translates some things or the way that he presents certain ideas. But it's still extremely helpful resource. What was I looking for? I was looking for Kabbalah. Okay, so I if you want me to read through the whole thing, I will, but I can give you like a short excerpt of like what he says. Um, Esoteric tradition, Kabbalah, sometimes translated as mysticism or occult knowledge, is a part of Jewish tradition that is preoccupied with inner meaning. Whether it entails a text, an experience, or the way things work, Kabbalists believe that the world does not wear its heart on its sleeve, that God truly moves in mysterious ways. But true knowledge and understanding of that inner mysterious process is obtainable, and through that knowledge, the greatest intimacy with God is attainable. Technically, the term Kabbalah only applies to the form of Jewish occult gnosis that emerged in medieval Spain and Provence from the 12th century on. That is where we get the Zohar from. Jews outside the circle of academia, however, use the term Kabbalah as a catch-call for Jewish esotericism in all its forms. That is how I use the term, but I
Right.
also use it in a way that is in the most literal sense of a transmission of transmission of wisdom from student from teacher to student.
It's a closed
That is the
practice.
yeah, right. He goes on for another page, but I don't want to like
Right.
bore you
So,
with that.
did you just to kind of, I guess, shift a little bit here? Did you grow up in Orthodoxy?
No. So the only person who was Orthodox and observant in my family was my grandfather from my mother's side. My family, my immediate family, we didn't keep anything. My father never grew up religious. Was a very secular Israeli, is a very secular Israeli Jew, and my mother also didn't grow up religious because my grandfather had become religious later in life. So she didn't grow up religious, and so she didn't bring that on. She is more spiritually inclined, but not observant. And so I started on my path, I guess, like the earliest um, thing is the questions that I started asking, like my mom and whatever different people, about the nature of reality and God, and why do we exist, and why are we all, like those big questions that maybe a 7-year-old isn't usually asking at
Right.
this time. And that kind of started the ball rolling, and then I went to a Jewish day school because I was diagnosed with ADHD and other learning disabilities, and this school happened to be um, a school for kids with that, and also a Jewish day school. So that's how I got into a Jewish day school and was able to get the Jewish answers for these questions, and went along that path. And long story short, I went into a youth movement that, like a youth outreach movement program that slowly but surely helped me become more and more observant until 2012, where I decided to start keeping Shabbat fully. And then it kind of just went on from there. I went to yeshiva after I graduated high school, and it's a continuous journey. I'm still on it. While I am still observant, my ideas around Judaism and God and humanity, everything has evolved. Um, but yeah, that's the story. To
Gotcha.
your simple question of were you born Orthodox, and I give you my whole life story.
So so you are a Sephardic Jew. Is
Correct.
one of the questions I get a lot actually is what the difference is between Ashkenazi and Sephardi, and so maybe you could answer that for those in my comment section.
Yeah. Well, it just boils down to where you were born, basically. When the Jews were exiled from Israel, they they were dispersed throughout the world. This is the general, like, gist of it. I'm not going to go into the specifics,
Right.
but they ended up everywhere, right? They ended up in many different places, and Jews who, like my family, who were in Spain from as early as the 1200s, um, were were used to were influenced by the culture that they lived in, right? So they still had in common with every other Jew the tenets of Judaism, the Torah, which was never changed, the laws and the major tenets of Jewish law, but little things like, um, I'll give you I'll give you an example. You're not allowed to cook food on Shabbat. So we have a way of having, but you should still enjoy yourself and have hot food on Shabbat. So we have a way of having hot food on Shabbat without cooking on Shabbat, which is by, usually every Jewish community has some sort of dish that they have that they cook overnight. They cook for the whole day. That the cooking starts before Shabbat starts, it is taken out of the oven Shabbat morning, Shabbat or Shabbat afternoon to have for lunch, and it cooks continuously throughout the whole period, throughout that whole time. Um, Now, depending on where you are from, meaning where you were exiled to or where you ended up being in the diaspora meaning outside of Israel, you had a different dish. So Sephardic Jews have something called chamin or dafina, which is variation like of vegetables and meat and different spices. And it's the same thing for Ashkenazim. They have something called cholent, which is a stew of beans and meat and potatoes that have different spices to it. That's the difference in the culture with Sephardi and Ashkenaz. It's a cultural difference with little differences that are not, um, what's the word, that are not super important in a sense. Even
Right.
even when it comes to the differences in how we read the Torah, we don't read different words. We just sing them differently. Like we have different cantillation for how we sing the Torah, because our traditions were influenced again by the cultures around us. So the cantillation of a Sephardic Jew reading the Torah is going to sound more Middle Eastern, more Oriental than a Jew who comes from or who ended up in Eastern Europe, right? So that's another difference. And another difference that is with every Jewish community, regardless of the culture, even within Sephardic communities, another difference is that communities were headed by rabbis, and different rabbis instituted specific laws for their community, or they saw interpreted laws in a way for their community, and so that was established for that community. For example, even though this is okay, this is a technical example. Technically, Sephardic Jews do not have a prohibition against polygamy, marrying more than one wife. Biblically, this was something that wasn't prohibited, right? It was allowed.
Right.
We do see many problems with polygamy, right? There's a lot of problems happening in the Bible with polygamy.
Right.
God does not say don't do it, but he clearly shows us that there are problems with it. So a rabbi named Rabbeinu Gershom, or Gershon, or Gershom, I don't remember exactly, and I don't remember where he lived. You'll have to look him up later. He made takanot, which were, I don't know the English translation for a takana, but you can say it's a law. It's a type of law. He made these laws that stipulated that polygamy was not allowed anymore. Now, he was an Ashkenazi rabbi. For the Ashkenazi community, this was now instituted. But for the Sephardic community, it was never really instituted, even though we left that aspect, polygamy, we left that behind with the Ashkenazi community. It was never institutionalized as a part of Judaism, that it's not allowed. Right? So, for example, if there is a Yemenite Jew out there who has more than one wife, and it's not considered against the Torah, and it would be considered a facet of his Sephardic Judaism that is not shared with Ashkenazi Judaism. There is also differences in the setup of prayer. Not major differences, but whether the congregation sits down or stands up when there's a certain blessing that is read, is going to be different in different communities. And so for Sephardim, we sit down, and for Ashkenazim, they stand up. And sometimes Ashkenazi liturgy is going to have some words that are not there, whereas Sephardic liturgy, it might be a little bit more expansive, might have more wording. Those are the basic differences. There isn't really much differences, because at the end of the day, it is the same Judaism, just different flavors.
Right, flavor. I like that. That's a good word for it. So what's your favorite field of study in Judaism? If I feel like I don't need to know the answer to that question.
I mean, yeah, I feel like it's apparent with my page that it is respectively Tanakh and Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism. I love the stories of the Chumash and delving into it and finding all the different layers of meaning, and just getting further and further down, or up. That and Jewish philosophy would be my favorite areas.
Absolutely. And we'll get a little controversial here with this next one. How was your experience growing up in I don't know, maybe Canada is a little different. Did you grow up in Canada? My understanding is you grew up.
Well, Yeah, I basically grew up in Canada. I came here when I was 8, so most of my life is in Canada.
I guess I would consider that a mostly Christian nation, similar to America, more or less.
Yeah, safe to say, yes.
What was your experience growing up as a Jewish kid in that environment?
Yeah, pretty insulated because I grew up in a Jewish bubble. You know, I did not grow up in an insular Hasidic community like is portrayed in, Orthodox or improperly portrayed in my unorthodox life. Um, but I grew up in a Jewish bubble. In where I live in Toronto, the Jewish community lives on one street, Bathurst Street. It's a very 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 long street. It's actually one of the longest streets in Canada. Um, but along that, we basically settled along that, and there's I think maybe like 200,000 Jews in Toronto, and they all decided to live on this one strip. Um, but yeah, I grew up around mainly Jews, so I didn't really experience so much of. I mean, yeah, watch TV, and then I wasn't not exposed to. I wasn't like hidden from the outside world, but it was
Right.
more prevalent to me that I just spent my time with Jews most of the time, so it wasn't really a thing that I thought about. Um, I remember like my first like anti-Semitic incident, which I completely like. I'm like, okay, cool, like big deal, like where was I was walking with my friend during Passover after a meal, and we were walking by an intersection, and a car passed by and threw pennies at us, and like we had to like think for a second because like it was the first time that we've ever been noticed negatively as Jews, or even really noticed as Jews, because we lived in an area that was so Jewish, um, that people just didn't care. And then we saw them like, wow, okay. But yeah, so growing up, I was not super. You know what? When it came to Christmas, I felt um, really like pushed aside as a Jew and not represented. And like, there is Hanukkah here, but everybody
Right.
is with Christmas, and Christmas is being shoved down my face, down my throat. So that part wasn't super fun, and I actually always grew up whenever I saw um, Christian themes in shows and movies and in media. I actually always thought it was Jewish. I translated it to Jewish, like when it was something that like a biblical reference, like
Right.
when the Simpsons did their little Bible stories, for example. Like I grew up on the Simpsons. I always connected that to Judaism, um, and and I never really worked it out when I was younger that Christians had a very, very different idea of the Bible. Very different. Um, yeah, that was like something that I was a bit disillusioned with when I was growing up. I didn't really understand the Christian world at all. I understand it only from a Jewish perspective. Jesus was this rebel Jew who was like putting Judaism in danger, and was put down by the Romans, and these Jews who were off started worshiping him because they thought he was Messiah, and Nebuch to them, which means like poor them, um, and and a lot of what they worship, what they do is avodah zarah, is complete idol worship, because they believe in a man being God or more than one God, and they have idolatry because they have this cross with a man in their church. Like it's all silly stuff that I don't really care about. I didn't really care about when I was growing up, and I lived in a very Jewish centric world. So I saw everything was Jewish, to the point where when I went on TikTok, and I was first exposed to Christian Kabbalah and Western esotericism, Western Kabbalah with a Q. And I hear these people saying things like Sfiroth or Sephiroth and Klipoth, and I'm like, what?
What? Yeah. What are you saying?
Like, no, it's Klipot, and maybe you just like didn't get it right because you were reading it just from the English. I don't know, and I thought, but no, it's a completely different thing. Not completely different, but so I was not as exposed to the world as, you know, definitely as I am now, or as I would have liked to be. That was my upbringing was, even though it was not observant, it was very Jewish, very Jewish.
Yeah, that actually goes kind of into my next one is how often do you receive condescension and hostility from Christians? Which
only on TikTok.
I was gonna say I've witnessed on TikTok so much, bro.
I've had like a few anti-Semitic incidents in my life, personal ones. None of them were very big, and I could not tell you the denomination or religion of the person insulting me. But the interactions I've had with Christians up until TikTok have mainly been positive, not negative, neutral. It's been neutral. I've had interactions with missionaries for the most part. Yeah, it wasn't terrible. I think TikTok is when I experienced the most hostility and insult to me, as even if they weren't personally attacking me, but the way they were speaking about Judaism or even about Christianity superseding Judaism, I've never been so insulted by Christians than on TikTok. But I've also created really great relationships with some Christians. I have some progressive Christian friends, progressive clergy who I've had incredible discussions with. They've helped me in my spiritual journey. You know, I've met people like you and people like Bought by Blood, and Seamus, and you know, and I've had really positive interactions with Christians as well, which is why I sometimes get frustrated when I go on rants about Christianity on TikTok, and then I inevitably get well, not all Christians, and well,
right.
I know you don't. Like,
right.
I really do. I know it's not all Christians. I'm not one of those people who will see an idiot on their TikTok talking about fear tactics to get closer to God and think that is all Christians, that is all of Christianity. I think that's ridiculous. That's the same type of thing that I don't want people to think about individual Jews, right? That we were just talking about this. So yep. I'm not going to think like that of Christians, of all of Christianity. But yeah, I've definitely experienced some pretty intense hostility on TikTok in my DMs and through like public interactions with people that I never thought I would get. Like,
I'm curious actually, just because. So I know TikTok has been I think wonderful for communication and dialogue between people of differing faiths. In as much as it's been a conduit for violence and
definitely
and rudeness, but who would you say you receive the most hostility from? Because I know naturally there's some hostility that like we receive from atheists just for being religious in general, but then you as an Orthodox Jew. So there would be atheism and Islam even and Christianity. Who would you say you receive the most hostility from out of those three?
Oh, hands down, evangelical fundamentalist Christians.
So I didn't need to
Hands,
ask,
like
but I wanted.
there's not even like there isn't even a competition. Yes, I have received hate from Muslims. I have received hate from okay, a close second would be the pro-Palestine anti-Zionists. That's a close second.
Right.
But other than that, no. And the atheists will put the random comment of like, well, this is all bullshit. I'm like, great take. Great take, Kevin. Like, okay, big deal. My style of Judaism does not call upon the real atheists with actual arguments to come onto my page, because I don't really subscribe to things that their alarm will go off and be like, hey, this is something that I need to combat, like we see with like Christian takes that atheists tend to combat. And I see that and I understand that.
Right.
But yeah, definitely Christians. The comment that the messages that I've gotten from some of them in my DMs have been like horrifying to the things that come out of their mouth. And again, also I also want to state on the upside, the DMs that I've gotten from so many Christians who've been moved by like my singing, or been blown away by the ideas that I present, I'd actually outweigh, at least in my DMs, not publicly, but in my DMs, they outweigh the nasty ones.
Actually, I've got to take this opportunity just to say, because there, pretty much every time that one of your singing videos comes across my timeline, I send it to my dad, just because he loves music as much as I do, and yeah, man, he loves your content as much as I do. And
Oh, I'm glad.
he told me one day, he said, that young man just has a voice that was crafted by Hashem for the sake of praising Hashem.
I've heard that before along those lines.
It's
Heard people
incredible,
say that.
man. And I pride my ability to sing as well, but you truly have a gift, my friend.
I appreciate that.
How many times have you had an attempt to convert you from either Christianity or Islam?
Islam, Islam, none. I've had theological discussions with Muslims, but none where I have felt that they want to convert me. Now with Christians, I've had Christians trying to convert me for a while, but that's also because when I was younger, I looked for missionaries. I wanted I wanted to fight. I thought that I knew everything back then, and I was ready with the same way that they were ready with their passages. I was ready with my passages, and so I had a few interactions of that, and a few interactions that I didn't myself, look for. Um, you know, there was a time that someone knocked at our door and whatever, but there was also a time that I called those billboards on the sides of the highway that are hotlines to like people to
Yes,
Jesus. I called one of them with my friends for fun, like
you did it.
as
Oh,
we were on a 3-hour drive and had nothing better to do, and we just came back from a Shabbaton, which is a like spending Shabbat basically with a group of youth. I don't know how to explain it exactly. It's a retreat, and we were like, okay, why not? And basically we went. I was on the phone with him for I think an hour and a half, going like debating with him, but
that's
it was just for fun.
incredible.
Yeah. On TikTok, however, so many,
I was just saying, pretty much
so
every
many,
comment section in your videos.
and I foolishly went into many conversations on TikTok in the beginning, thinking that they were in good faith and thinking that they were simply asking to share viewpoints and to share ideas. But then very quickly, or sometimes not, sometimes they dragged it on, it turned into a proselytizing mission.
Right.
And it was very frustrating those times, because I felt so gullible and so like betrayed in a sense. Like I wanted to understand where you come from. You want to understand where I come from. Beautiful. We
Right.
can learn from each other, and I can learn, and great. But like, don't come to me like trying to pull me in, and therefore assuming that I'm on this lower level than you, and I am like this poor soul, what like, and that just brings such a bad taste into your mouth when you have an interaction with someone who looks at you like that.
Right.
Because as soon as they try to proselytize, automatically, even if they don't consciously think that, that is the message,
And
right?
it's not even. I think in most cases it's not conscious, but really, an Orthodox Jew like yourself is, I would say, in Christian circles, almost considered like the pinnacle of all
The prize.
missionary achievements. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I've heard there's points. You get more points for for converting a Jew.
right, and it's funny that there's jokes about that, because yeah, I think for most people it's not conscious, but it's one of those things where it's like, man, like, step back and really think about your outlook on that, because it shouldn't be that way. Even in Christianity, that shouldn't be the way that you're thinking about this, you know. Um, so yeah, it's something that I from my own experience, and you probably remember, because I kind of led off in our conversations with this, that I always try and clarify that, look, my goal is not here to convert anybody to the way that I believe. um, my
And one of
goal
the
is
reasons why we've kept this relationship going is because of that. Because I saw that. I was also suspicious in the onset, but you've proven to be honest and a great person to have discussions with. And so yeah, that's a big part of why this has kept going, and why I don't necessarily have the same relationship with other Christian creators, or non-Jewish creators, or whatever, who talk about Torah and the like.
right. It's I view you and a few of the other Jews that I have a good relationship with on TikTok as like, you guys are more my teachers than anything. That's I learned so
I
much
have
from you
definitely learned a
guys.
lot from you as well. I've definitely learned a hell of a lot from you.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. So, uh, real quick, because this is a common question I get actually a lot, especially from even in the Christian world, people who are like flirting with the idea of learning Torah from a more
Yeah,
Judaic perspective.
I
Is
am gonna have to go after this. I want to answer this, but I
Oh,
am gonna have to go.
I
Yeah, yeah,
appreciate that. I didn't mean to keep you so long, my friend. Kosher, because I
no
understand you're
problem.
a kosher inspector. Um,
Yeah.
so explain what that is and how it's different from halal, because a lot of people don't know it's different from halal.
Well, it's very different from halal. I don't really know the parameters that halal puts on slaughter. I know that there is a specific way of slaughtering. When it comes to slaughter, there are some similarities between kosher and halal. The knife has to be extremely sharp. It has to go to a certain. It has to cut a certain valves. Um, there is a blessing that is made as well. Blood is covered. Otherwise, I don't think there are any other similarities, because then we go into so many other things when it comes to kosher that are not in halal. So the similarities between halal and kosher stop, I think, at slaughter. It Otherwise, when it comes to, like, Muslims don't have a problem with bugs. Muslims don't have a problem with the gid hanashe, which is it's a certain sinew in um, the thigh of the cow that cannot be eaten by Jews. That is another aspect of kosher. I don't know if they have a problem with blood, so I don't know if all of their meat is salted and put through like 3 different water baths and salt baths in order to extract all the blood, as much blood as possible. I don't know if there's a similarity there. And again, bugs are also not an issue in halal, I believe, and it's a very big issue in Judaism. And people kind of miss that part of kosher, that 5 to 6 times it is mentioned the prohibition of eating bugs in the Torah, which brings it to a much more intense level of stringency, I guess. So so that's why even when it comes to fruits and vegetables, there is an aspect of kosher. There's an aspect of kosher when it comes to utensils, because utensils need to go through water and fire to be purified. And if they are touched or cooked, if something is cooked in them that is not kosher, they need to be koshered, meaning they need to be made kosher by either going through fire or water, depending on the utensil and how it is used. There's also meat and dairy, like Potato Munchies just mentioned in my comments, thank you, which is, I don't believe there is the same thing in halal. I could be wrong. Again, I don't know the ins and outs of halal, but meat and dairy is definitely also another aspect of kosher. Not only are we not allowed to eat kosher meat and kosher dairy together, I say that specifically because there are some non-Jews there are some Jews who think that eating a cheeseburger, for example, from McDonald's, is breaking the laws of eating of meat and dairy. It's not. It's breaking the laws of kosher. Breaking the laws of meat and dairy would mean eating kosher meat and kosher dairy together, or waiting, or eating dairy after you've eaten meat without waiting a certain amount of time is also a part of kosher. It's a lot more complicated than halal, but it has, I guess, the same general foundations. Even when it comes to the specific animals, there's differences. I believe that in that halal you can eat camels, and Judaism, a camel is not kosher. So there are different parameters, but I think the baseline might be the same. It's a dietary restriction for spiritual purposes. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a reason I brought it up is just because, yeah, a lot of people don't know. A lot of people think kosher just means that like a rabbi blessed it and now it's okay. They don't understand that.
Yeah, that's a huge misconception that I always try to undo, is to say that it's not just a rabbi blessing your food. It's very complicated and extensive lists of various laws around food.
Right,
Yeah.
like you'll see like a bottled water. Even I've seen that has a hechsher on it, and
That's really excessive.
well, what I try and explain to people is that's got to do with the cleanliness standards of where it may be bottled and manufactured.
It has to, yes, it has to do with the processing plant and whether it processes other material.
Right.
Meaning, if in the same vat or where, however that the water is stored, if they use that for making other products that aren't kosher, then it would not be kosher. But the reason why it is actually objectively excessive to put a kosher certification on water bottles is, and as a kosher like inspector I can say this, is because water plants are water plants. They don't use, they usually are not producing other things,
Right.
or putting other things through their things, so it's all good. But yeah, it's definitely not just a rabbi. Yeah, I'm gonna be done soon. Yeah, I'm gonna be done soon. Yeah, my mom. I'm being very loud.
I'm so sorry, my friend.
No. This was a pleasure. I was looking forward to this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I will certainly let you go at this point, and I thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom.
Thank you.
And I hope you have a wonderful evening.
You too. It was great speaking to you, Brad. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.